Once upon a time, there was a mysterious bookstore in a quaint little town that everyone avoided after dark. This bookstore, named Whispers and Wonders, was owned by an eccentric old man known only as Mr. Elroy. Mr. Elroy was a peculiar fellow who claimed to have traveled the world and collected books from every corner of it. The most intriguing and feared item in his collection was a dusty old book titled The Haunted Chronicles. The book was said to be cursed, filled with terrifying tales that could come to life if read aloud. Despite the warnings, curious tourists often visited the bookstore during the day, drawn by the legends surrounding the book. One day, a group of friends on a road trip stumbled upon the bookstore and decided to explore its eerie interior. There was Emma, the adventurous leader, Jack, the skeptic, Lily, the cautious one, and Tom, the jokester. As they entered the dimly lit store, Mr. Elroy greeted them with a knowing smile and led them to the Haunted Chronicles. "Be warned," he said, "this book holds more than just stories. It holds the power to change your life." Emma, intrigued by the challenge, insisted on buying the book despite her friend's reluctance. They left the bookstore with the heavy tome in hand, planning to read it that night at their cozy cabin in the woods. As the sun set, they gathered around the fireplace, and Emma opened the book with a mischievous grin. "Let's see what all the fuss is about," she said, as she began to read the first story aloud. The story was about a haunted mansion, where every night at midnight, the walls would whisper the names of those who dared to enter. As Emma read, the air in the cabin grew colder, and the flames in the fireplace flickered ominously. Suddenly, a cold draft blew through the room, and the pages of the book flipped on their own. "It's just the wind," Jack said, trying to sound brave, but his voice wavered. Lily clutched her blanket tighter, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Tom, ever the joker, laughed and said, "Looks like we're in for a spooky night, huh?" But as the night wore on, the spooky turned into something more sinister. Strange noises echoed through the cabin, footsteps on the roof, whispers in the walls, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Emma's excitement began to fade as she realized the stories in the book were starting to come to life. "This isn't funny anymore," she said, closing the book abruptly. But the noises didn't stop, and the shadows grew darker and more menacing. The group huddled together, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Maybe we should return the book," Lily suggested, her voice trembling. "Or maybe we should finish reading it," Tom said with a nervous chuckle. Jack, ever the skeptic, decided to take matters into his own hands and grab the book from Emma. "It's just a book," he said, flipping to the next story and beginning to read aloud. This story was about a cursed forest, where travelers would lose their way and never be seen again. As Jack read, the room seemed to close in on them, and the walls of the cabin began to creak and groan. The shadows in the corners grew taller, stretching towards the ceiling like ominous figures. "Okay, enough," Emma shouted, snatching the book back and slamming it shut. But the cabin had already changed. It was no longer the cozy retreat they had arrived at earlier. The windows were fogged over, and the door creaked open on its own, revealing the dark, dense forest outside. "What is happening?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I think we're trapped in the book," Emma said, her voice shaking with realization. "This is insane," Jack exclaimed, but even he couldn't deny the growing fear in his chest. "There must be a way out," Tom said, trying to stay calm, though his usual humor had vanished. The friends decided to explore the cabin, hoping to find a clue or a way to escape the nightmare. As they ventured into the dark hallways, the walls seemed to close in, and the floorboards creaked under their weight. Emma led the way, her flashlight barely piercing the darkness ahead. "Look, a map," Jack exclaimed, pointing to a dusty old map hanging on the wall. The map showed the cabin surrounded by a dense forest with a single path leading out. "This must be the way out," Emma said, tracing the path with her finger. "But how do we get to the path?" Lily asked, her voice filled with doubt. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, and they turned to see a shadowy figure approaching. "Run!" Tom shouted, and they all bolted down the hallway, away from the approaching figure. They burst through the front door and into the cold night air, only to find themselves in the middle of the cursed forest. "This isn't right," Jack said, looking around frantically. The trees loomed over them, their twisted branches blocking out the moonlight. "We need to stick together," Emma said, trying to keep everyone calm. They followed the path on the map, but the forest seemed to change around them, leading them in circles. "We're lost," Lily said, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, we just need to keep going," Emma insisted, though her own confidence was waning. As they walked, the sounds of the forest grew louder, rustling leaves, snapping branches, and distant whispers. "I think we're being followed," Tom said, glancing over his shoulder. The group quickened their pace, fear driving them forward. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream from somewhere deep in the forest. "What was that?" Lily cried, her heart pounding in her chest. "We can't stop now," Emma said, urging them to keep moving. But as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with the shadowy figure from the cabin. The figure was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into their souls. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, though his voice shook with fear. The figure remained silent, its presence growing more oppressive by the second. "We need to get out of here," Emma shouted, pulling the group in the opposite direction. They ran through the forest, branches whipping at their faces, until they finally saw a clearing up ahead. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, and in the center stood an ancient stone altar. "What is this place?" Tom asked, panting from the exertion. "I don't know, but it feels like the way out," Emma said, approaching the altar cautiously. On the altar lay a single, glowing stone with strange symbols etched into its surface. "Do you think this is the key?" Jack asked, staring at the stone in awe. "There's only one way to find out," Emma said, picking up the stone. As she held it in her hands, the symbols began to glow brighter, and the forest around them started to fade. The ground beneath their feet rumbled, and the clearing seemed to collapse in on itself. "What's happening?" Lily screamed, clutching Emma's arm. "Hold on," Emma shouted as the world around them dissolved into a blinding light. When the light faded, they found themselves back in the cabin, the book lying closed on the floor. "Are we back?" Jack asked, looking around in disbelief. The cabin was just as they had left it, warm and cozy, with no sign of the horrors they had just experienced. "I think we made it out," Emma said, dropping the stone, which had now lost its glow. "That was insane," Tom said, collapsing onto the couch. "What do we do with the book?" Lily asked, eyeing it warily. "We could burn it," Jack suggested, but Emma shook her head. "No, we should return it to Mr. Elroy," she said, picking up the book. The friends agreed, and the next morning they returned to Whispers and Wonders. Mr. Elroy was waiting for them, a knowing smile on his face as they handed him the book. "I see you made it back," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "What was that all about?" Emma demanded, still shaken by their ordeal. "The book tests those who dare to open it," Mr. Elroy explained, placing it back on the shelf. "You have faced your fears and come out stronger," he added with a wink. The friends left the bookstore, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. As they drove away, they couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of their adventure. "I guess we'll have some stories to tell," Tom said, grinning. "That's one road trip I'll never forget," Jack added with a chuckle. "We survived a haunted book," Lily said, shaking her head in disbelief, "and learned that sometimes the scariest things are the ones we don't understand." As they drove into the sunset, they knew their friendship had been strengthened by the ordeal. And though they swore never to open another haunted book again, they couldn't help but wonder what other adventures awaited them.